I got those down at Heiko at that food store. Yeah. Brad tried to steal them several times.
Hey, Tarleton State! We're about to get started here in a few minutes, so I ask that everyone please turn their cell phones to silent or off, because we are going to be on the radio, so you can get that done in the next couple of minutes.
We had a nice lunch. That's what makes you feel better.
On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in the year 1919, guns along the Western Front fell silent, thus ending one of the most bloodiest wars in human history. 60 million Europeans were put under arms, 8 million dead, including 50,000 Americans, 20 million wounded, and a map of the world altered as empires disintegrated. On November the 12th, 1919, President Wilson signed a declaration proclaiming that day as Armistice Day. Later, President Eisenhower signed the bill proclaiming this day as Veterans Day, honoring veterans of all of our nation's conflicts. Good day. I am Dean Minix, Dean of the College of Liberal and Fine Arts of Tarleton State University, and I welcome each of you today to join us in celebrating our Veterans Day. We have many special guests. Please hold your applause until after I have recognized all of them. First, we'll begin by recognizing the Texan Battalion of Tarleton State University. We moved Veterans Day up a week, as you may know, so that these cadets could be with us. They are an invaluable part of today's celebration. Next, it is my personal pleasure to recognize the 7th and 8th grade classes of Morgan Mill ISD. Welcome to the students and faculty of my community. And special recognition to some of my most cherished friends, Dr. Stuart Chilton, United States Marines retired, Colonel Will Tate, United States Army retired, and Mr. John Hefton, United States Army retired. All of these gentlemen are seated in the front row. They are indeed the defenders of the American dream. Please join me in welcoming our special guests. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you today our host, Dr. T. Lindsay Baker, Gordon Endowed Chair and Director of the Gordon Center in Thurber, Texas. Dr. Baker, please take over.
Thank you, Dr. Dean Minix, and my welcome indeed to all of you for this event in which we're going to hear the remembrances of 3 men who fought in the Korean War. The Korean War, the first significant armed conflict in the Cold War. This was a conflict between the Republic of Korea, which we typically call South Korea, supported by the United Nations, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and the People's Republic of China, with air support from the Soviet Union. The war came about because of the political division of Korea by an agreement of the Allies at the end of World War II. Beginning in 1910, Korea was a conquered territory of Japan. a very exploited, conquered territory. And it remained in Japanese control until the end of World War II in 1945. The victorious Allies set up two governments on the Korean Peninsula, one in the south, one in the north. An election was to be held in 1948 to determine the future of the country, but that election was never held. Tensions grew and then escalated until actual hostilities began on the 25th of June, 1950, with an invasion by the north of South Korea. The United Nations, and principally the United States, came to the aid of the Republic of Korea, eventually pushed the northern and Chinese forces up the peninsula. Fighting continued until 1953, when an armistice was signed that ended the fighting and set up an armistice line along the 38th parallel where the fighting had begun. There was never a peace treaty. To this day, the 38th parallel delimits North and South Korea, and there is only an armistice. Now, we have three gentlemen today who are engaged in the United States Armed Forces in this conflict in Korea. Fred Zimmerman, on the left, served in the U.S. Army. I'm sorry, in the middle, pardon me. Kenneth Smith served in the U.S. Air Force. J.C. Campbell served in the U.S. Navy. He has a model up there in the front of a vessel of which he served. He invites everyone after the program to come up and take a look. That's my job as the Master of Ceremonies, to prompt these gentlemen with questions and keep them on schedule, because we are broadcasting live on KURT FM 100.7. At this very moment, your coughs and so forth are going out on the air. People are listening to you as they're going to be listening to these gentlemen's words. And it's my job to bring things to a close at the end of an hour. So I'm going to begin by asking each of these men if they will tell you how it was that they found themselves in the military service of the United States in the Korean War. So we're going to ask them to tell you how they entered the armed forces. After that, they're going to tell you about their training. And then third, each of them in sequence is going to tell you about their wartime experiences. So let's just start on this end of the table. Gentlemen, please tell us how it was, what were the circumstances of your coming into the military service of the United States.
I'm Kenneth Smith, joined the United States Army in 1953. I was raised in West Texas, and the economy was pretty well down at that time of year due to a steel strike, since it's oil field country. And so I went to San Angelo, enlisted in the military, took a physical in Abilene, and then moved to Fort Sill, Oklahoma to be formally inducted in, given tests and everything.
I'm Fred Zimmerman, originally from Illinois, a little town, a little country town. And jobs were hard to find, as they are now. Being from the country, all I knew was farming. And so winter came out and farmland, farm time just about gave up. So there was 5 of us was going to join into the military. Well, that 5 turned into me. I joined the Air Force in '48, and the rest of them chickened out. And I joined the Air Force and had a great time in the service. spent a little over 20 years in the military, been overseas several times, and I'll get into that later, but God has blessed us immensely.
And my name is J.C. Campbell, and my first involvement with the military was I was in high school in Irving, Texas, and I was a senior in 1950, and it was the thing at that time for to join the reserves. So I did, along with my friend and a lot of other people, because the reserves, you went to meeting once a month, and then they paid you money. And so, as you know, when you're in high school, you don't have a lot of money because you can't work a whole lot. So we did that. And probably about 8 or 9 months later, this place called Korea, there was something starting over there. And so at the reserve base, they said, we've been notified that we're going to have to call up active duty, some of you reservists. And my friend and I that had joined together, we had made this pact that if I got called to go to active duty, he would join, and if he got called, I would join. About 2 weeks later, he got his notice, so I go down and sign my name up, let's go. And I go home, and I should not have done that because my mother liked to kill me. You know, she didn't like me going away, being 18, 19 years old, but it did. And I left Dallas, Texas, the train station over there on December the 15th, 1951, to go to Great Lakes Naval Training Center. And if you know, December is cold in Great Lakes, Illinois. And I stepped off of the train into about 1.5 feet of snow. And then I guess we'll get to the next question.
And we're almost into the training. I'm going to ask each of the veterans, now that we have them in the armed forces, I'd like for each of them to tell the story of their military training and how they became airmen, soldiers, and sailors.
Upon finishing my enterprise session in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, myself and another group was transferred to Camp Gordon, Georgia, which is now Fort Gordon, and was assigned to the M Company of the 47th Infantry Division. I went through 8 weeks of basic training. That's where they taught you how to be a soldier, how to handle your weapons, take care of your equipment, and everything that's really basic for the military. Upon completing 8 weeks of basic training, we remained in the same unit and went into what they call the 8 weeks of AIT, Advanced Individual Training. And we were selected for heavy weapons infantry training. So after 8 weeks of training as heavy weapon infantry on basically 50 caliber, 81 4-deuce mortars, 105 and 75 recoillets, we completed our training, and we was all given assignments where we were going after that. And out of 243 men in the company, there's 47 of us, myself included, headed to Korea. Our field first sergeant, Sergeant Gray, called us out the day we got our orders, read them off, and said, when I read your name, I want you 4 ranks over here on my left. And he called off 47 of us. And he said, you're my little fighting warrior, you're going to Korea. And he called off another list. He said, the rest of you, when I call off your name, get over here on my right. Four ranks. And after he got through, called it off and telling them where they was going to Germany, different posts. He said, from this day until you leave here, this is our formation. My little fighting warriors will lead you on the left, the rest of you duds follow on the right.
After I finished my basic training, I was assigned to Carswell Air Force Base here in Fort Worth. I was in schooling, seemed like I was always in schooling. I was tied up with the Atomic Energy Commission for a few years, was frozen to the base at Carswell. Was required to get a top secret clearance, and during all of this time I was in training, and training to go to the Pacific, to go with the Atomic Energy Commission. And I'll get into that a little bit, but it seemed like I never got out of school. I mean, there was something advanced. Each step, there was another step to take. And I've been blessed about that, seeing and doing the things that I've done.
I'm going to ask if you'll back up and tell us a bit about your basic training.
It was basic, really. I mean, I think most of you guys are probably familiar with that. We got up, they trained us to be away from home, basically. We learned to make beds. I was fortunate not to have KP or one of this nature, but a lot of them learned how to peel potatoes, this, that, and the other, and clean pots and pans. But my basic consisted of additional training. I don't know how this all come about, because everything I did seemed like it was in a training phase. And that's, but basically it was just training up until the time we left to go to the projects over in the Pacific. So my whole career was in a training situation for one step next.
Okay, you remember I said my friend and I, my good buddy that was in high school, we joined together and we had a pack. Well, when we got to Great Lakes, Illinois, it was about, I guess it was about the 18th, because it took us a couple of days to get from here to Chicago and to Great Lakes. We got there and stepped off of the train into the snow, and they put us in quarantine, so to speak. We had to go to this one place, and a few days later, that was right before Christmas, and it just so happened that we got there just at the wrong time, because that Christmas we did, the ones who got there, at that camp at the Great Lakes Naval Training Center. Everybody else who were there got to go home for Christmas, but we got to stay there, so that was bad timing on our part. But we started our basic training, and it's what he said, it's basic training is kind of like everybody else, but we did such things as they would come by early in the morning and wake you up, and you'd get up and you'd start marching, and you marched to breakfast, and you marched to lunch, and you marched to this class, and you marched to that class. It was we had weapons training, we had firefighting training, and you can imagine what that's going to be when the temperature is about 10 or 12 degrees outside. So, but we did that. And go back a little bit to my friend. He wasn't with me. 6 weeks after we got to Great Lakes Naval Training Center, he got a medical discharge. So that meant that I got to go ahead and serve my time. But you know, looking back on that, that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because being 19 years old, I really had no idea what I wanted to do in my life. But that gave me a little wake-up call to say, hey, you know, this is something you can do for yourself if you want to do that. I used that training up there in Great Lakes. It kind of helped point me in a good direction, I feel. I got sick, got in the hospital, and 3 days and you lose your company. Well, our company was made up of Texans and Louisiana guys, and I didn't want to lose them, so I had to finagle the thermometer to get out of the hospital to go back to my guys, my squadron. And so we did that. But that's you get a little bond going through these boot camps, if you would. But they teach you what they think you need to know, and you know, it helped us to get to where we got to our ship, our station. We knew basically some of the things. We knew this wasn't a floor, it was a deck. We knew that wasn't the stairs, it was a ladder. The overhead is not the ceiling. So we knew some of these things, and we'll get to a little bit more of that in just a little bit. But that basic training, our boot camp, was really what opened the door for us to know that I was in the Navy.
They've gone into the service, they've been to their basic training, and they've become soldiers, sailors, airmen. Now, gentlemen, tell us about your experiences in the Korean War.
After I completed basic, the ones of us that were assigned to Korea were sent by troop train to New Orleans, Louisiana. From there, we was released to a 10-day leave to go home, visit our parents, friends, whatever. And upon returning, we organized a troop train and went up cross country into Tacoma, Washington. And a couple of days at Tacoma with orientation and everything and getting our assignment, we was moved one morning, about 1 o'clock in the morning, it's dark, into Seattle, off the buses into a warehouse. When we walked out the other side of the warehouse, we loaded on a ship called the USNS Marine Phoenix, 504 foot long with 3,100 troops on it. Not counting the crew, that's Army troops. And 21 days later, we landed in Sasebo, Japan. In Sasebo, we turned in all our Class A uniforms, anything we did not need in Korea. Drew all of our field equipment, our weapons, was taken to the firing range, zeroed our weapons, orders were cut, assigning us to our unit. I was assigned at that time to the 2nd Army Division, the 2nd Infantry Division. We loaded on, we was there only 3 or 4 days. We got on the General O'Hara and moved into Incheon Harbor. Now in Incheon Harbor, we had to unload off over the side of the ship with net on the LCMs and LCUs. For the ones that don't know, Incheon at that time only had a 4-hour window for unloading the ship. The harbor had a real high tide, and if you stayed longer than that, the ship would be sitting on the bottom. So we had 4 hours to get off and get in. That didn't waste time. There were trucks lined up when we hit the docks, and you got off the LCM, LCU, and they loaded you into the truck. When the truck was loaded, they shut the tailgate and moved it out. And late that night, we ended up in a repo depot, and I woke up the next morning in the 40th Infantry Division repo depot. And when they called us out the next morning after breakfast, they said, if your orders read 40th Infantry, fall over here through this tent, you'll be processed for your unit. The rest of you move over here, and they'll recut your orders, reassigning you to the 40th Infantry Division. So you ended up where they took you. My assignment was H Company, 224th Infantry Regiment. When I moved up there, we was in the Kumwa Valley up north of the 38th, and we was in reserve. That back in the old Triangular Division days. The 223rd and 160th Regiment, which was part of the 40th, was up on line. I arrived at my unit about, I think it was about the 14th or 15th of July. And we stayed there in reserve. The day after the ceasefire went into effect, the 27th of July, 2200 hours, never forget it. Things got quiet all of a sudden. I mean, there was a lot of noise and racket going on, and then all of a sudden, 2200 hours, total quiet. And day after that, my unit was moved up online. And I was up online for a few days, was living in bunkers. And my company commander called me in one day and said, you're not supposed to be here. And I said, why not? He said, you're too young. Nobody under 18 was supposed to be up on the front lines. So he moved me back to headquarters company, and I worked out of headquarters company in the A&R section. I had been a projectionist in civilian life for a while. And we got 16 millimeter projectors, and I loaded them in the Jeep and run around and showed movies to the troops late in the evening. We had a couple of minor incidents. We had alerts periodically. Well, the 90-day ceasefire ended in October, but things went kind of quiet here. We were called out on an alert, but it was kind of quiet. We were still carrying our weapons and ammunition at that time. And then 90 days later, we had another alert on the 27th of January, and somebody crossed their wires. And instead of setting up a yellow alert, which is standby, somebody set up a red alert, which means put your ammunition in your weapons and get in your foxhole. And we spent most of the night there. We were loading trucks with ammunition and actually moving them up onto the lines. But then they finally got things straightened out, they got quiet, we went back. Well, the 40th Infantry Division left Korea in April of 1954, went back to California as California National Guard. I did not have enough points to rotate with it, so they reassigned me to the 24th Infantry Division, and I ended up with 24th Quartermaster Company. I carried a heavy weapons infantry MOS, and when I got there, the company commander said, I don't have any use for you, I don't have any slots for your MOS. So he said, what am I going to do with you? I said, well, you got trucks in the motor pool, and I can drive the truck. Do you need a truck driver? He called the motor officer up, and the motor officer said, yeah, man, I could use them. And that was about the time we started to move into tents and put floors in our tents and kind of insulate the sides of them with sea ration boxes to keep some of the cold out, help us. But it got a little bit nippy up there, but 24th was in the Yanggu Valley. So I spent the rest of my tour sheltering supplies from Chuncheon over the pass into Yanggu Valley. And every now and then had to make a trip up to Christmas Hill over the ridge. We had what we call a ridge. It was a narrow road, one way, had an MP station at each end and controlled traffic flow each direction. Had them go one way for a while and then the other way. And you had a drop off on both sides. So it was a little bit hairy. You watch what you're doing driving it. Biggest incident there, we got called out one night. The Christmas Hill needed some supplies during the monsoon, and it was raining, and we had to cross a river to get up the ridge to get up to Christmas Hill. Well, when we got there, the river was almost to the bottom of the bridge, and our convoy leader, the lieutenant, took his jeep and he said, I'm going to ease on across, watch me. And when I get over, I want you guys to come over one at a time. And I was the lead truck since I was loaded the heaviest, the way we over set up a convoy. And I eased on over, and we just come over one at a time and made it across. Well, after we got up to Christmas Hill and get ready to start back, we found out the bridge no longer existed. So we had to leave Christmas Hill on the back road to go back into Tajon and come into Chuncheon. We spent the night on Christmas Hill, stuck in our truck. And then we left there and went into Tajon and come the back road back into Chuncheon and back over to Yanggu Valley. And then in November of '54, I would move back to Incheon just before Thanksgiving Day. And we Thanksgiving dinner there and then loaded on the General Black and returned to Seattle. And that ended my tour in Korea.
Thank you so much.
I had already put in for my top secret clearance, and it was in the process of running through. And they had 5 B-36s going to Hawaii, Honolulu, Hawaii, Hickam Air Force Base. And I was on this trip going over there. I found out about Korea. They put the message out. I was in the lobby of the Royal Hawaiian Hotel in Honolulu, of all places to find out what's going on. But anyway, I've been in training, a number of training things there. My wife and I married in August of '52. September, we had to fly out to California for some additional training for these projects. In October of '52, we left and went to Kwajalein Islands. It's part of the Marshalls, it's out in the Pacific. And November the 1st, which 58 years ago Monday, Mike, the name Mike dropped, was the first fusion of thermonuclear bomb. It was a hydrogen bomb. It did away with an island called Ilugawab. It's, this is all in the computer if you'd like to look it up. It left a hole in the ocean floor 6,240 feet wide, 164 foot deep. It encompassed over 350,000 square miles. There were some Japanese fishermen out fishing that got caught up in this radiation. One of them died and the others were severely burnt. We were 350 miles away from there, and the sky lit up so bright it was unbelievable. Well, we had another shot, that same thing. Mike was the first one, and then King was the second one. It wasn't nearly as large as that. Well, came back home, more training. And 1954 found me back on some more tests out on Weetalk. But I say all of this, there has been training, it's been one form of training or another, if nothing but for doing away with the radiation. When our airplanes were completely radiated. The airplane that I was on, B-36 over here, had a unit between 1 and 2 bomb bays that hung down about 4.5 feet, that had an electronic gate on it, that above 45,000 feet, we flew and got the radiation samples right up in here, got the radiation samples, so needless to say this was hot. That cloud, that mushroom cloud, reached 108,000 feet in 3 minutes. We had one of our airplanes that flew through the mushroom that was damaged severely. I mean, when it came back, everybody was cutting rivets, this, that, and the other, replacing rivets in the skin. And then we had a mothership, which was painted day-glow orange, that was strictly for flying around the mushroom, whatever area, so in case any of them lost their communications, or they could hone in on it. But that's where I was. I was frozen to the base, actually a total of 4 years, all during Korea vision, but I was tied up in something strictly non-combat. But anyhow, we've been blessed very, very much. We were not to have children due to radiation, but we said if we're going to have them, the good Lord's going to provide. We had 2 children, one of them premature, no, both of them premature, and one of them is a pilot right now. He's a corporate pilot, and the other one is a physical therapist. So we've been blessed through all of this. God has taken care of us, and we have the privilege of going out and sharing our stories with other people. We thank you very much.
I'm going to ask if you'll tell the audience about these extraordinary aircraft that you served in. And I'll just hold the picture.
This airplane has more than 30 miles of wiring, electrical wiring. It is known as the peacemaker. It is the only airplane that kept peace all during the Cold War without dropping a bomb in anger. We could leave anywhere from the United States, fly to Russia, which was our target at that time, fly to Russia and come back with no refueling. We did not have refueling capabilities. We had tanks, we had bomb bay tanks. I seen them loaded, but never did see any fuel put in. We could carry enough fuel in there to fly. Well, they had one fly around the Gulf for 54 hours. And the longest flight I was on, 35 hours and 40 minutes. But it was a very good airplane. It flew so slow, you could make mistakes and correct them before you had any problem. I hate to say it like that, but it would fly about 425, 50 miles an hour, but that's pretty good. But the altitude that we had on there, and we flew a feather-weighted airplane to get to the altitudes we had to get those samples. But the stories that I could go on. I do a lot of lectures on this airplane, and I just recently did one with the Navy group in Mineral Wells about the hydrogen bomb. But anyway, this airplane is one of the most forgiving airplanes there ever was. But the fact that it maintained peace, you never hear about it. But for the whole Cold War area, it was a good airplane. It was, well, I just thought the world. I've got a number of hours in it.
And this is the plane known as the B-36. Next, please.
And to add a little bit to that, this airplane was built in Fort Worth, Texas, at Convair, which is known now as Lockheed Martin, where I used to work. And as a young person in high school, living in Irving, they would do their flight pattern, would come over Irving and go almost to Dallas, and then they would do a wing over. They'd tip that thing up and just twist it around, and the windows in your cars would sit there and vibrate. In your houses, they would vibrate. There was so much pressure coming from those propellers. Six pushers and 4 jet engines on that thing, and he said the bottom of his thing said 6 turning and 4 burning. And that's what they were doing. They could get there. They could make it happen. After I got out of boot camp, and I got 14 days leave, you only got 10, so I had 4 more days at home. And that was very interesting for me to go back home after being away for a while, to see my friends, to see those who were still in town and those who, that I used to pal around with, to visit with mom and dad. And it was a different kind of a world for me, because I had grown up a little bit. Stayed home for 14 days, and then I caught a C-54 airplane. It was a DC-4, I believe it was. It's a long time ago out at Love Field to go to California. And that was the first airplane trip that I had. It was commercial, American Airlines. And I thought I was in hog heaven. And so I'd never done this before. So it opened up the world for me for experiences. I reported aboard ship. And before I got there, go back a little bit, they said, what do you want to do? What do you want to do aboard ship? And I said, well, I'm in communication. I worked at a telephone company in Irving for a while. And I said, I'd like to stay in communication. They said, okay. So I got out to California, and they had put me in the fire room. You know what the fire room is? That's where you got boilers. That makes the steam to turn the propellers, okay? So now you connect how telephone communication and the end of the boiler, I couldn't figure it out, but that's where my station was. And I tried one time to get off, go to the submarine, and they wouldn't let me do that, because the submarines, they had better food. You know, they would cook your eggs upside down, and in ours, they were scrambled. You know, if you got eggs at all. So it was a different learning experience for me. We stood watch on the destroyer, and I was in the aft fire room. This smokestack, back to back, that was down below that in the bowels of that ship was where they had 2 boilers down there. You could run both boilers at the same time with one crew if you had to. We oiled the deck plates. Everything on it was steel, so to speak, and you had to keep them oiled because the seawater or the atmosphere would rust them. And in the Navy, you don't have rust. You either got gray paint, or you got red lead that we had then, or you have oily decks. So you had to. That kept them from where you could use them. And the captain didn't like it when he had rust come somewhere. And you polished your brass. So that was always a responsibility. But we had 4-hour tours. Standing watch is from 12 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 12. You started all over again. So if you had 12 to 4 in the daytime, that meant that you had 12 to 4 in the morning. And so that's what you did when you were at sea. You also had a general quarters station. Mine was there. And my general quarters station, whenever they went to battle stations, well, they had two ways to get in. One was inboard, had a ladder that came up. On the outside, you had a ladder that went up, but they had hatches at the top. And when you went to general quarters station, they put those hatches down and locked them. And it didn't really dawn on me where I was at until we were in Vallejo, California, in dry dock one time, and I had to take off an outboard dump valve. And so I took it off, and I looked down through that little bitty hole, and I said, this steel's not very thick. And it wasn't. It was about an 1/8 inch thick. The steel, what kept the water from me, that's all that was there. And I said, holy mackerel, there's not much to this ship. Well, it wasn't. Every ship was built like that, except the battleships. They had 12, 16, 18 inches of armor on them. But the destroyer was known as the Greyhound of the Sea, and they were designed and built to protect the big ships. Battleship, you usually had 4 or more destroyers around a battleship. If there was a torpedo coming, the destroyer took the torpedo. And that 1/8 inch steel on that destroyer wouldn't keep anything out. You could take a hammer and almost drive a nail through that thing. But that was the reason they were so fast. We could run about 30 32 miles an hour if we had all 4 boilers online and everything working good. So we could run pretty fast. We had 6 gun mounts of 5-inch 38 on there. There's 2 in the front, 2 and 1 in the back. And each one of the gun mounts had 2 5-inch 38 weapons on it. And we could fire them fast enough that the barrels would get hot enough that you couldn't, you didn't want to be around, didn't want to touch them. So, but to make the ship go, the boilers, we had regular boilers, would get you just regular steam. Then you had superheaters would really jack the temperature up on that steam, and it would give you more RPM on your turbines to make the propellers go. We got different. We were assigned to do different things. One time we went north of the 38th parallel, as he was talking about a while ago. That was up in North Korean territory, and that was not a good place to be. But we were assigned to go up and to pick up some Marines that had been doing some work behind the lines. And come to find out, after we got them board, got them back, they really looked used. And we told them, said, just take your clothes off, what you got left, and throw them in a pile over there. And we gave them some of our Navy stuff and fed them some good meals. They hadn't had a good meal in 6 weeks. They had been behind the lines doing recon work. And that makes you appreciate that your fellow service member with you. You know that you get where you say the Navy's the best. Well, that's because you're in the Navy, or you get in the Army. That's the best. Well, you're in the Army, but you got other service members that are with you that's doing the same job that you're doing. And so we learned to really appreciate the Marines and the rest of the guys that we worked with. So we had lots of experiences. We went up north 38th parallel one time, and it was during the winter time, and we had seawater frozen on our lifelines around the ship. That it was cold, and at times I would get up from my bunk, and I would go down and get my foul weather jacket and go behind the boiler where it was warm and sleep on the deck, on the steel deck plates, because it was warm and my bunk was not warm. So there's things that help you in your lifetime that you understand you can do these things when you don't think you can. But all these young folks that are here today really appreciate the ROTC guys back here because that makes me proud, because you read all of this stuff in the newspaper about things, about the kids and stuff, and then you see these young folks back here, and it really makes you proud to be an American. And so I've had a good life in my time in the military. It was good. It was short, but it taught me that when I was coming back home from my on the transport, the Gerald Man, from overseas to get my discharge, we came through the Golden Gate Bridge in California, and they had the biggest American flag I'd ever seen hanging off of the Golden Gate Bridge, and I knew that I was very proud to be an American. And a lot of us don't realize that until things like that happen. So, we appreciate being here. We appreciate Tarleton State University for having this, because if you don't tell, if the people who live these experiences don't tell them, nobody knows. So this is a good thing that Tarleton is doing, and I really appreciate it, and I'm sure these guys do too.
We've heard the stories from these gentlemen, and in a moment, I'm going to open the floor for questions from the audience members. If you have a question, I'm going to ask if you'll come down and ask your question into this microphone so that our simultaneous broadcast on KURT will pick up your question. But I want to begin this by asking each of these gentlemen if you will, for our sake, pick out one particular event or one particular memory or one particular person who or which stays in your memory especially vividly, and tell us this one special remembrance of your experiences in the Korean War?
I guess the most one I can remember is the lieutenant I worked for there. His name was unforgettable. It was artist Don Juan McKinley Davenport III. And after all these years, I have never forgotten. He was one of the first black officers assigned to the units in the military, and McTurner was a very fine officer, and I really enjoyed serving with him.
Well, I think if I was to go back and think what would highlight was seeing that unit when it exploded and saw that big mushroom crowd. Like I said, we was 350 miles away from there, and you could see that shock wave coming across on that ocean. And it took several minutes for it to get there. That was really startling. As a matter of fact, it was scary. I don't mind telling anybody, because here it is, it's pitch dark. Seemed like the only time they let airplanes take off with it, you know? But anyway, it was dark, and then all of a sudden, the sky lit up so much. We were told to sit with our arms bent, with our head in our hands, with our eyes closed. And it still was so bright. And I think that would be the greatest thing. I'd like to share with you that they've been doing these testing for 30 years. Millions of people have been involved in it. At this moment, there's 139,000 of us left. So we're rapidly depleting, I guess you could say. Just today I received a letter, 50 more had died this month. So anyway, I remember that thing.
There's probably more than one event that I can recall. One was, when you're scared, you really remember things. We were cruising one day off the coast of Korea, and we went to general quarters, and we couldn't figure out why. And I was at the hatch on the outside looking up before we'd shut the hatch down, and I saw 2 MiG fighters go over. And that's what they went to general quarters for, because we didn't know whether they were coming for us or what. But they did, they went over us. They were probably 10,000 feet. But for some reason, they went over. But that wasn't, to me, the thing that I remembered the most was, it has nothing, the only thing it has to do with Korea is that we went to Hong Kong on a little R&R one time. And that was, we anchored out in the harbor, and they had these girls over there would come aboard, and it was called Mary Sue and the Girls. And what they did was they came aboard our ship, and they did the dirtiest job that there was to do. They cleaned our bilges out. That's oil and water and all the garbage and stuff that's in the bilges. And you have to get in there with rags, and you have to dry it out, then you have to wipe all of that stuff out, then you paint it. And you know what their pay for it was? I was in the scullery at the time. You know what the scullery is? That's where you take dishes and the trays and the cups and the knives and forks and spoons. You wash them. And that's where my station was at that time. I had 3 months of that. And their pay was that whenever I got through, or if a sailor got through with his meal, he took his tray and he handed it to this lady, and she scraped some things off in this trash can, some other things in another trash can, and the rest of it in another trash can. That's what their pay was. They took home to feed their kids. And I thought to myself, holy smokes, and this is what could have been in my history, but it wasn't. I was fortunate enough to be born an American, and that's the reason that I'm so proud to be an American. And my service was just a short piece of what I really need to do to thank this country for giving me what I've got. But it really brought it home to me that day, and I don't guess I'll ever forget that. Thank you.
Now, it's your turn. As members of the audience, I'd like to ask if those of you who have questions would just come on up here to the front. There may be 2 or 3 or 4 of you in the line. It's all right. Everyone will get their opportunity. But I'd like to invite members of the audience to join me up here at the front and ask any of these gentlemen a question that may be back in your mind, come on up. And you can come more than one at a time. We'll get to you. Please tell the audience who you are, and then you can address your question to any of the veterans or all of them, as you wish.
Hi, my name is David Forrester. My question for you is this: my brother is currently stationed in Korea in the United States Army. My question for all of you gentlemen is, how does it make you feel knowing that there are still U.S. troops in Korea almost 60 years later?
Well, to me, it makes me feel like we are there helping our friends, the Koreans, protect their country. I'm proud of them. I worked with some ROTs while I was over there, the Republic of Korean Army troops. They're real fine people. The Korean people, I've always had a great respect for them.
Well, our country seems to be, that's our standard way of living, is protecting other people to give what we have. And I think this is basically what he says. We are there for a purpose. And we just got to believe that purpose is for the right thing. I realize they're away from home, and I don't like that, but they're there for a purpose, a unique purpose, each one.
Yes, and that our military is overseas. You know, you're proud of your guys for doing these types of things. You were there at one time, but the situation is different now. But to me, the sad thing about this is, and I don't want to get political on it, but it's sad that we're having to still be there.
That's right.
But I think that the way that the thing was administered, the war was administered when we were there, is totally different. I mean, you can see some similarities in it, that you can't do this. You got to have one hand tied behind you and on one foot in order to do your job. And it's just, I guess that's the politicians who run the war, and it's a shame that our people have to be over there to watch over, to help protect that country, because as he stated a while ago, that the Americans try their best, I think, to help protect and to make sure that everybody has a good life, and that's not always possible. And it's a shame that we have to, 60 years later, have to still have people there.
I'd like to add one thing. Mr. Crawford was talking about wanting to go to the submarine for a better meal. I should have invited him into one of our mess halls. For 16 months, we had powdered eggs, powdered milk, powdered potatoes. I never saw fresh milk, a fresh egg, or a fresh potato for 16 months.
Well, that was our standard fare, the powdered stuff, you know.
I remember one Easter on Annie Weetalk, we had fresh eggs. You could go back as many times as you wanted, get all you wanted. They only had, it's on a Sunday, they was open from about 8 till 12:30, something like that. No evening meal. I believe several ate set eggs, or not any question about it. They just would go back and forth. Fresh eggs, like say the powdered eggs, or those canned eggs, whatever. They're just, well, lack of anything, and I wouldn't feed my dog that, but anyway, that's what we survived on. But getting fresh eggs was tremendous. Just the thought, Easter Sunday, what else could you ask for than have fresh eggs?
When we came back from Korea after our 6-month deployment, where we went to Hawaii, Honolulu, and powdered milk, powdered eggs, this kind of stuff, you know, they brought home cases of fresh milk, cases of pineapple, fresh pineapple, you know, and they just put them on the fantail, which is the back of the ship, and they said, here you go, and you gorged yourself on fresh milk and pineapple, you know. So it was a good thing, but it was not a good thing either, because you didn't want any pineapple for a while.
We went over to an island. We had bad weather, and we couldn't run one of the tests, so we went to an island to excite ourselves, I guess. No people knew about it, but they had a lot of coconut trees. I don't know if any of you guys had much coconut, but it runs through you. We came back and went to Hawaii, and at the end of the table was a pineapple, and everybody could pick up a pineapple. That didn't help either, so it was good eating though, it was different.
Gentlemen, I have so many questions, I really don't know where to begin, but I'll just pick one out of thin air. I was fortunate enough when I got into this wonderful higher education business just a couple years ago to have a mentor by the name of Elmer L. Perrier. He was a World War II veteran in the Navy, and he came back as many World War II vets did. And I'm looking at three of my new friends in the front row. But he came back with a very deep dislike and resentment towards the Japanese. Did you have any similar resentment towards the North Koreans or the Chinese, or at that time the Soviets?
The Chinese, yes. The Koreans, not so much, since we was working with the South Koreans and there wasn't that much difference. But the Chinese we did. They were our, I must say, the biggest problem and headache we had. And probably should never have been involved in it, but they were. But one thing also forgot to mention is along with our powdered eggs, powdered potatoes, and powdered milk, all the meat product we got was canned, period. A lot of sea rations.
Well, of course, I didn't have any actual dealings with Korea when you get right down to it. I was tied up in other things. But I did have somewhat of a resentment with the Russians. It seemed like everything we was having training for was on account of the Russian situation. And lo and behold, I should happen to get a young boy, an exchange student from Azerbaijan, which is a part of the Russian. And I thought, little did he ever know how I literally felt about them, but I couldn't let it show it. But anyway, it comes back to haunt you in time.
I wasn't really, didn't have any experience with the Koreans or the Russians or the Chinese. I know that the Chinese were supplying all of the weapons and a lot of the forces and stuff to fly the MiGs. They're flying pilots to fly the MiGs, and so that was a danger to us. And I'd always heard that before we got to Japan, well, they said you don't go into the back roads. You stay on the main drag, because don't go into these caves. Don't do any of this stuff, because it was only 6 or 7 years after the Second World War that we were there. And so you still had, as a kid growing up, the Japs were they were like bugs, because that's what the news media fed you. And they were doing the Japanese people were doing what they were told, and the Americans were doing what we were told. So we had a kind of an attitude about that you really wasn't sure about